Mr. Speaker, today is an occasion for us to reflect upon the economic events that are unfolding before our eyes. To do so, I will be splitting my time with the honourable member for Edmonton Mill Woods. Let us begin with the grasshopper and the ants. One fine day in winter, some ants were busy drying their store of corn, which had gotten rather damp during the long spell of snow. Presently came up a grasshopper and begged them to spare a few grains. "For," he said, "I'm simply starving." The ants stopped work for a moment, though this was against their principles. "May we ask," said they, "what were you doing with yourself last summer? Why didn't you collect a store of food for the winter?" "The fact is," replied the grasshopper, "I was so busy singing, but I hadn't the time." "Well," they replied, "if you spent the summer singing, you can't do better than spend the winter dancing." And they chuckled and went on about the work. Now, the ants had been responsible. They knew that the sunshine of the summer would not last, that it was merely one season of the year. So they worked hard to accumulate and set aside the grains for the difficult times that they knew would be ahead. Now, what did the grasshopper do? Well, he assumed that the sun would always shine and that times would always be good, and therefore he needn't do anything but dance and sing and play. Well, it's not so long ago that the sun was shining on the global economy. In years 2016, 17, and 18, things were quite good. In fact, the U.S. economy was roaring, having some of the best growth that it had experienced in 2 decades. Commodity prices had recovered from their lows in 2014. Interest rates were as low as you could expect them to be. In fact, it was almost a perfect coincidence of events where growth was high and interest rates were low, all of which maximized the sunshine that blanketed the economic countryside. And we conservatives said, like the ants, now is the time to store away the grains, because the sun will not shine forever. And you remember what they told us? They said, "Oh, come on, let's dance and sing and spend. Let's spend the cupboard bare. We're not about the good times. We're not about the bad times, for the good times are here. And now is the time to squander those good times and to celebrate in a period of self-praise all the riches that now fall from the sky." Well, we warned that one day winter would come.
We did.
That trouble would arise, and that we would want then to open our covers and find them overflowing with a surplus of supply to get us through those cold, dark months and into the economic springtime down the calendar. And of course, across the way, the government said, no, we're going to continue to spend. And so what did they do, Madam Speaker? Well, in every single year since they formed government, their deficits have been bigger than they promised. They told us deficits would never exceed $10 billion a year. They reached $29 billion. They told us the budget would be balanced. 2019, that year came and went, and now they predict the budget will never be balanced. They put us on track to add $100 billion to our national debt. And they did this all while the sun was shining, convinced that the economic laws of the 4 seasons had been abolished, that bad times would never return, and that all we needed to do was sing and dance and spend. Well, it appears winter may have arrived. I look today at Bloomberg News, 9:30, and I quote, "Canadian markets were battered on all fronts as the collapse in oil sent shockwaves through a country with one of the biggest exposures to the commodity among the group of seven. Stocks cratered 10% with the biggest drop since October 1987. The loonie weakened. Government bond yields plunged to fresh records as investor pessimism deepened for the economy that barely eked out any growth in the fourth quarter and is already grappling with the coronavirus." I emphasize again the last point in the Bloomberg article, Madam Speaker, that in the last 3 months of 2019, we had growth of 0.3%, and that was before the illegal blockades and before the coronavirus broke out and started to impact on global economic matters. I go back to Bloomberg. The slump in oil will exact another heavy toll on the natural resource-dependent country, which generates about 9% of its gross domestic product from energy and has the biggest exposure to the sector on its stock market at 15%. And remember, that is the sector the Prime Minister wanted to phase out altogether. And it looks like he is achieving some success. Now, not only would the ants be unhappy with the approach this government took to the good times, so too would Keynes, the great economist, who leftists these days try to appropriate for themselves, but in his great work he wrote in The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, he explained that during good economic times, governments should run large surpluses and pay down debt in order to prepare a buffer and allow for economic stimulus when troubled times later come. And that is exactly the formula followed by the previous Conservative government. In the first 2 years it was in office, it paid off almost $40 billion of debt under Stephen Harper and Jim Flaherty. And to their credit, Chrétien Martin in the years prior did likewise. That decision to pay down debt prepared us for the winter ahead. And when the winter came, and it was a serious winter, we in Canada were more prepared than any other G7 country, weathering that grand winter storm better than anyone else. Why? Because our cupboards overflowed with the surplus of responsible planning and hard work that had happened in the summer months. This government, having done the opposite, now leaves us weak and vulnerable as we enter this winter period. So, having rendered us so weak and so vulnerable, what can we do now to get us through the winter? And we as Conservatives have a plan. That plan would reduce taxes on workers and entrepreneurs to stimulate hard work, enterprise, investment, and consumer activity. It would remove the anti-development barriers imposed by Bills C-69 and 48, which prevent us from shipping our resources from the Pacific Coast and from building pipelines to deliver it there in the first place. We would require a 2-for-1 red tape reduction rule. That is to say, if the government brings in one new economic regulation, it needs to get rid of 2 of them in order to remove the red tape that is holding back our economy. And we would replace wasteful corporate welfare, like the millions for Bombardier, Loblaws, MasterCard, BlackBerry, with lower taxes for all entrepreneurs to unleash their power to generate wealth and get us through these hard times. In other words, we want to unleash the fierce and ferocious power of free enterprise, which is the only source of prosperity that will get us through these difficult times. Madam Speaker, we believe in responsible planning for trouble ahead. That planning did not occur. So now we as Conservatives step forward again with a responsible plan to get us through the hard times, to get us over the difficulties, and to allow Canadians to fulfill their potential so that anyone who works hard can achieve their dream.